Welcome to the Future Thinkers Podcast. I'm Mike Gilliland.
And I'm Yulia Ivanova. And this podcast is all about the future. Hello, fellow future thinkers. This is episode number 31, and it's about basic income. Before we start, I wanted to say thank you to our recent patrons and donors. Dan, Elliot, Henrik, and Rewrite Humanity. That's a great name. Thank you guys for making Future Thinkers possible. And as a side note, I recently wrote a digital nomad guide to Plovdiv, Bulgaria. So if any of you are planning to travel to Europe this year and want to come hang out with us, check it out at futurethinkers.org/Plovdiv. That's Plovdiv.
All right, so a bit of an introduction about basic income. Basic income is the concept of unconditionally giving every citizen or resident of a country a livable amount of money on a regular basis. This is not the same as welfare or other social programs because every citizen would receive this amount regardless of their life circumstances. This is also not the same as socialism. People from all over the political spectrum support the concept. Recent pilot programs of basic income have shown promising results, and the idea has been getting a lot of traction in recent years. So our guest today is Scott Santens. He's a writer, an advocate of basic income, and he's the moderator of the Basic Income subreddit. I'm excited to talk about this one because we've had a lot of discussions recently with friends. There's a lot of things going on all over the world in different countries where people are experimenting with basic income, and it's a really, really exciting concept. Enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't we start by, maybe you can tell us a bit about your background with basic income and why you got into it.
I've been a long time Redditor, and there was a thread that hit the front page back in 2013. It really got my attention. It just like it got, of course, many people's attention that day. But it was about just how quickly technology is advancing, and yet how so few people really understand or even know just that rate, how quick it is. And I was always a fan of I've always been a fan of technology too, and yet there was some stuff in here that even surprised me. Like, I had no idea that there were robot trucks already driving around, and that there are companies that had the explicit goal of automating all their trucks by 2020, because you can do that because you're on private land and not like on roads and stuff. So that kind of thing that got really thinking about this, so what do we do when we're looking towards this future where technology is doing so much more labor for us, when it's replacing essentially labor with capital. And so you're going towards this future where inequality is going to keep on getting bigger, and instead of people being better off as they should be when machines are doing so much more of our labor, they're not better off, they're worse off. And so that's the direction that we're going. And that really got me looking into this as to, what other options do we have? How can we steer this ship in a different direction? And that's what led me to the idea of basic income. And so that was in 2013. And I really dove into it. Like, I had read before about the experiment in Dauphin, Manitoba, the Mincome experiment there. I shuffled it away as, that's it works when you give people money without conditions and, poverty is eliminated. And that's just a good idea. And I just kind of shuffled it away. But then looking at it again, I was like, okay, so this is not just a good idea. This is something that we absolutely have to implement as soon as we can. And that was just this, it was a good example of how we've looked at this already, and we already know some things about it, like the effects on work disincentive and how, that's not really the issue people think it is, and how, it helped, reduce cost of healthcare in Canada with lower hospitalization rates of 8.5% in Dauphin, and how young teenagers shifted from work to school. These kind of effects that we kind of know about, but just aren't really talking about. I was not aware that we even tested this in the U.S. I was not aware that we almost had a version of it under Nixon, in 1970. I did not know that we had that something had passed the House and failed the Senate. Like, there were so many things I did not know until I really started looking into this. And it's been a heck of a ride, like just finding all the information there is out there and really trying to accelerate this discussion because I just think it's really important.
Yeah, it seems like it's been mostly an ideological discussion up until very recently, and now people are kind of waking up and realizing, oh, we actually might have to do this. It's kind of becoming almost a necessity.
Yeah, exactly. Like for the longest time, we could always have eliminated poverty. We could always have looked at this in that way and said, well, this is the right thing to do. And, back in the 1970s, that was the way that we were looking at it, is in this war against poverty. But now the conversation is different. It's avoidance of technological change. And, what's interesting, too, is that still itself is a false argument. This idea that we need to do this because of technology that's right around the corner. The fact is that technology has been affecting us for decades. It underlies globalization, it enables it, and technology is already replacing manufacturing work. We've just been finding ways to shift our work from the manufacturing sector to the service sector. We've shifted medium-skilled jobs to low-skilled jobs in order to keep this system going. And of course, that just results in lower incomes. It results in a slowing economy. It results in lower consumption because people can't afford to buy anything. So the system is already being negatively affected by technology. And just a lot of people either don't know that or just kind of ignore that.
Why don't we get the standard questions out of the way here? Like, how does a basic income get implemented?
My favorite way of going about this is, first of all, we have to recognize that we already are spending a lot of money in our current programs, not only on things like welfare and housing assistance and food assistance and these kinds of things, but also we are spending money on tax credits that we don't need to be spending on tax credits. We're spending it, this is welfare for the middle class and the rich that we don't call welfare. We've got all these loopholes and subsidies and all these things that they don't need to be done the way that we're doing them. Like, why are we giving, say, billions of dollars to the agricultural industry so that food is cheaper instead of just giving money to people so that they can afford the food? We're distorting markets in a way that actually affects the entire world. Like, what happens when we make cheap corn and then we dump it onto the world markets, and then all of a sudden we put people out of jobs all over the world? It's something that's very distortionary in a globalized market. And so we want to change the way that we do things like that. So if we do that, then there is a lot of money there for basic income that we're already generating. So on top of that, there is a requirement for additional revenue if we want like a full basic income, which is what I recommend, of say in the U.S. a $12,000 per adult basic income or $4,000 for anyone under 18. This is something that will cost money. But it's at the same time, it's not as high as people think it is. We could do this by, say, just introducing in the U.S. like a 10% value-added tax in combination with like carbon taxes and a financial transaction tax of less than 1%. We could do this with land value taxes. And we could even do this with citizen seigniorage. And this is a concept that a lot of people aren't familiar with, which is that right now banks are the ones creating essentially all of our money. Like, we print some money, but it's not the government that is creating the money, it's the banks. And so we are allowing private institutions to create our money supply and profit from it with interest, which is kind of, I think, ridiculous to me. So we should instead create money itself publicly because it is a public good. And if we do that, if we shift that ability from banks to the actual government to create money that we need in the economy, we can lower the amount of taxes we need to raise because essentially we could give everybody, let's say, $100 a month or $200 a month in newly created money, which would not be inflationary because, again, we're replacing the money that we're already creating via banks. And so we could do that. And then, of course, that would lower the bill from what we would need to raise for $1,000 a month to $800 a month. Like, that's just another, I think, smart way of going about this. And again, creating an added change that I think makes sense from what we do right now.
The interesting thing, I was looking at all the charts that you have on your Imager account. And it's interesting to see that actually some of the wealthiest people pay the least taxes because
Sure.
they're able to lobby for tax deductions or arbitrage, whereas the majority of the population is not able to lobby for those things and affect those laws. So if we take away some of those loopholes, I think we'd be able to recover massive amounts of tax that could go into the government instead of being in the hands of the 85 richest people in the world.
Yeah, for sure. And it also recognizes too that, right now the richest pay the least because they're paying taxes on mostly unearned income, because their income, that most of their income is coming from, is from like carried interest loophole and from capital gains. Like, this is not work. This is not tax on hard work that people claim. This is like tax on unearned income. It's just it's money earning money. For some reason, they're not seen as lazy for doing this. We see it totally differently. And the fact is that as we go into this future where, again, capital replaces labor, this is a concentrating of income at the top because they're the ones who own all the technology. Well, it only makes sense that if they should be paying taxes on that, it would make more sense to actually tax capital gains at a higher rate than this lower rate that we're doing right now.
Why don't we talk about the practical benefits of basic income? You've mentioned teenagers staying in school longer and not dropping out as much. What are the other benefits, especially in terms of what's been studied and what's been shown in practice?
This could go back to the cost conversation too. So like you mentioned, this creates a healthier population. Like, there is a connection between income and health. We know that connection exists, and we know that one of those examples is reduced hospitalization rates. But again, like, because income is related, this will like reduce rates of cancer, of diabetes, of all these stress-related diseases out there. And effectively diseases for the poor, or also even the inequality has a lot to do with this as well. Like, there are a lot of costs in the system that we can save by making a healthier population. Like, another example, actually, from evidence that we have, this is from both the negative income tax experiments and also in Alaska. Access to income for pregnant mothers means that when the babies are born, they're born to healthier mothers due to better maternal nutrition. You can see that as being an effect that builds generation after generation. Like, a healthier child born because they were born in a womb that was a less impoverished environment, then that person is going to grow up to be a healthier adult. They're going to have their own kids, and that will in turn, go down the line. And so this is a very long-term effect. Aside from health, if you look at, the cost of crime, like, that's also very expensive. It's been estimated that we spend over in the U.S. $1 trillion per year on the costs of crime. And this is not only, let's say, the avoidance of prison itself and the cost of that, but also what happens once you're into that system. If you go to prison and you come out, then you're essentially locked out of the economy. You're not able to earn what you could have earned otherwise. So we're limiting our own economic growth as well through what we're doing. And that, what I call, is also, it's a cost. It's something that we're not seeing as a cost, but it is. I'm very interested in the psychological side of all this because that's actually my own background. My degree is in psychology. And so all these studies that I feel relate to this fascinate me. One of the things that really fascinates me is this idea of extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. That once you give people the ability, the power to say no, then that really changes things psychologically. Not only can that power enable people to bargain up their wages for low-demand jobs, like they would say, well, I'm not going to work for $7 an hour, but I would work for $15 an hour. Or I'm not going to work 40 hours in this job that I hate, but I will work for 20 hours. Like, I could do that. There's so much more bargaining power available there. But aside from that, there's actually very interesting effects on motivation. Like, there's an experiment where they gave people 2 tasks, and they said, okay, choose between these 2 tasks, and we'll come back here and see how you did. And then in another condition, they gave people those same 2 tasks, and then just said, okay, you can do either of these tasks, or you can do neither of them. You don't have to do them. And then they left. So what they saw is that people spent more time on the tasks where they had the ability to not do anything. They spent 7 minutes versus 5 minutes. This is something I think is kind of profound, how we view work differently when we view it as being our own, as our own choice, as being voluntary. I think that we want to shift towards this economy where that's what we're doing. If machines are doing more and more of the work, that work is actually usually mostly, manual labor. It's stuff that's easily automatable. It's not the stuff that's more creative in nature. And it's this stuff that we can really accelerate. We can do more creative work. We are free to do that. In fact, that's another thing that Dan Pink has looked at this, and I recommend, watching that like TED Talk video or reading about it as well. It's just how incentivizing tasks with money actually works well as long as the task is a routine task that doesn't require higher order creative kind of thinking. If it's just like a kind of a hard labor task, money works for that. But that's exactly the work that we're automating. So what about the work that isn't that? What about the work that requires like creative thinking? Well, there money actually has the opposite effect. It worsens performance when money is used as the motivator. For this future economy, and even the economy now that we're already shifting towards, we want people to think more creatively. We want to motivate people intrinsically. People are interested in autonomy, mastery, and purpose. People are interested in being in control of their own lives. They're interested in bettering themselves. They're interested in getting better and better at something. They want a sense of purpose. They want to be doing something that they feel is more than just the task itself, the vision of something larger. It's kind of looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs as well. It's saying that if you eliminate people's focus on meeting their basic needs of food and housing and these kind of things, if you just cover those, then there's needs above that are higher order needs that people can then focus on. Another experiment that I find fascinating is how they found that the effect of poverty is effectively like a mental tax. If your mind is always thinking about, covering your next bill, how you're going to be able to do this or do that, or if, you're working 60 hours a week or whatever, your mind is scarcity oriented and you're thinking very short term, and the decisions that you make are different. The comparative effect of that is a loss of around 13 IQ points, or it's also comparable to being drunk or losing a night's sleeps that you've been up for over 24 hours. Like, these are the effect on the mind that poverty has, and that just constantly thinking of how you're going to pay the bills has an effect on. So if we eliminate all that, then we can shift our entire society into a society that's thinking more long term, and it's very intrinsically motivated. It's pursuing the work that is most valuable to each person. And I would also argue that that's the best work. People are so much more productive when they're doing work that they love versus doing work that they loathe. So that's what we want.
We've had this discussion between ourselves quite a bit for the last number of years. Being entrepreneurs and working on different businesses and stuff, and our finances being up and down, and kind of like you'll have these weeks or even months of just total stress because you don't know how you're going to pay the bills, and then that makes you make stupid business decisions, which has happened to us many times. And then at some point in the last couple of years, we decided this podcast was something we were going to focus on, put all of our attention into. And that's been something we've worked harder at. There's been more of an enjoyment in life because of that.
It's totally at the top of our Maslow's hierarchy, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I value this stuff so much more. Like, I'm a cable cutter, so I don't really watch cable TV. I actually love watching YouTube videos. And I mean, I much prefer essentially the work that's being done for free. And I love that Patreon, which is what I use even myself, is a way for people to connect directly with those who are creating the stuff that they most love. It makes so much more sense to me when people pursue what they want to pursue. And I just love all the stuff going on right now thanks to the internet. And it's unfortunate that it's unrecognized as work. Like, you have a podcast that like has 10 people or something, like, so that's not work. But if you have a podcast that has 1 million people, then it is work. Why is that? Like, if you're just not known as well, it's still work. And you got to start somewhere. People just need to be able to be free to pursue these things, and they'll get better over time. They'll build their audiences over time. And before you know it, even people who don't see it as work right now will see it as work. And also, to your point about variance of income, one of the stats that I think is actually kind of scary is that in the U.S., the bottom 20% of income earners, 3/4 of that group, their incomes are varying 30% month to month. That's a huge variance. Like if your total bills come to, let's say, $1,000 and you earn $1,000 one month, so you barely cover your bills, and the next month you earn $700. So you're unable to cover your bills. You're doing the same work, but it just didn't result in the same thing. That's the difference from the way we work now versus the way we used to work. And this is something that I think the older generations don't get about the system now, is that they were raised in a full-time career kind of economy where you would work 40 hours a week, your income would never vary, and you were able to do that for decades.
Stay in the same job for almost your whole life.
Right. And we're not doing that anymore. We're getting more and more away from that. We're going to what's called the atomization of jobs. We're looking at, like, now you can work for Uber if you want to, and you could do 2 hours today and maybe a couple hours, next week, or maybe you focused on it 8 hours a day if you want to. Like, there's so much more variability. There's so much more effective even control that people can have over this. But there's also, you do have that control if you have the ability to do, say, multiple part-time jobs and whatnot, and you can patch that together. But at the same time, because we don't have a basic income, a lot of this is done out of pure necessity, and it's people don't want to drive for Uber. Some do, some don't. But the people who don't, they're doing it because they're underemployed. They want to earn more money, and they can't because they don't have this 40-hour, week job or whatever. And so they have to do that. I don't think that makes any sense for this economy that should be working better for us. I mean, technology enables us to have more control over our lives, but in order for that to really be true, we have to make sure that people get that income so it's true. Let's make sure that people have an income floor so that they can actually choose the way that they work. And that's what I think this is really about, is just having more control over the work, and not only paid work, but unpaid work as well. Why is it that it counts as work if you get paid to watch somebody else's kid, but not your own? Doesn't make any sense to me.
What are the arguments of some of the biggest detractors of basic income?
Well, your common arguments, and we even saw this in Switzerland too, is this belief that it's too expensive, and that if we could even raise the tax revenue, that it would be far too much for the economy to handle. And that's false. There are immigration fears, and we saw these kind of immigration fears just with Brexit, and we're seeing it also with the rise of Trump. It is just this idea that we've got to keep people out. And so if we had a basic income, then everyone would flood over the borders, and then the whole system would break down. And that's false as well, because this varies, of course, according to implementation. But for the most part, basic income is seen as an income given to citizens and possibly legal residents. Even in Alaska, you have to live there for at least a year to meet the residence requirements in order to earn the Alaska dividend. You don't just move there and immediately get it. And just like if we had it in the U.S., I think the most likely the way it would be set up is that you have to be a citizen. So in that case, that actually incentivizes legal immigration. If the assumption is true that people are going to come over the border in order to get the income, they have to actually have a social security number. I mean, you can't just magically get money. This requires documentation. This would actually incentivize people to go through the legal route, in which case that's what people want who are against immigration. And so I think there's actually a good argument for basic income even reducing this xenophobia that we're seeing, because so much of it is born out of this fear and out of this insecurity, this they took our jobs mentality. Mm-hmm. And if you're the one as a citizen getting a basic income and you're not forced to work, it's not coercive, you just choose to work and you choose how you work, and then you look at immigrants coming over, and if they're undocumented immigrants and they're not receiving a basic income, you can look at that and go, well, okay, I'm okay with that because they're not getting what I'm getting. I'm a citizen, they're not. And so, sure, they can come over, they can do the jobs I don't want to do, great. Like, it really kind of changes the way that they look at this because it's no longer this, again, the scarcity mentality of if they get something, I don't get this something. And that's how it is right now. And that's really what underlies a lot of our issues is that people think everything is like this zero-sum game where someone has to not benefit in order for someone else to benefit. And that's not the case. Everybody can benefit.
Another argument that I've heard a lot, and I used to be of this mindset that if you don't somehow incentivize people to work, then they won't work. But actually, I've totally come over to the other side. But I'd like to hear your take on this.
So again, I would say those are the top three now that we've listed those. And yeah, there's this worry that people won't work. And I like to base what I think off of evidence. I'm just weird like that, I guess. I like
how dare you?
I like observing actual things, and I love experiments, and I love seeing how people actually behave. It's fascinating if you look into the results of universal basic income given like in where it's been done in Namibia, and it's where it's been done in India, and even basic income like circumstances where through unconditional cash transfers, which is a tool that's used more and more widely all over the world. If you look at these things, and even like with Give Directly, this charity that's essentially giving away basic incomes, and they plan to do a very long 10 to 15 year basic income experiment, actually. If you look at all the findings of all these, it's actually, I would say, profound to see the amount of entrepreneurship that happens under basic income. So they found that people actually work more in these situations where essentially a lack of money locks you out of markets. It locks you out of your society. You're not able to really do anything. But as soon as you have some money, at least some, now this is essentially, capital for the people, venture capital for the people. This is, people have to have something in order to do something. You have to have money to make money, this kind of situation. And they found that people use this money to create businesses to a large degree. Like there was a 300% jump in self-employment in Namibia as just one example. And you see that everywhere. Like you see people actually creating businesses. And the other flip side of this as well, which is very important, is that people are creating businesses, but because of universal basic income, they also have customers. And so all these customers are created and they're able to purchase the goods of these businesses that pop up. And that's where you see these great multiplier effects. You see great development. You see people doing things that they weren't able to do before. And it even has an effect on the society as a whole. I've written an article about how basic income was bound to increase social cohesion. One of the first things that was seen in one of the experiments was that people pooled their incomes together to create a community center. They found that increases in income have pro-social effects, that people are more willing to work together. In India, there was even more interactions between different castes that originally didn't really talk too much together, and all of a sudden they found them working together. Like this is something that I think is an additional incredible effect. This is also why Sam Altman is looking into this for Y Combinator, that he has recognized that potential on entrepreneurship and small business. That's his thing. And so he really wants to research this and spread the word even about this and show that it works and help make that happen, because he knows that a society with basic income is going to be so much more entrepreneur than it is now. And it's really important to see that when we give people basic incomes, not only can they pursue the work that they're essentially prevented from right now, but they can also pursue all this unpaid work as well. Again, not only parenting, but I'm really fascinated in the open source economy. The Wikipedia is such a fantastic example. Like there have been surveys of Wikipedia and they ask, why do you do this? And they actually do it because it's not paid. Like it feels better to do something like that as a contribution. It's this volunteer mentality. It's this part of having purpose. It's saying that I'm a part of something bigger. I would love to work on Wikipedia and edit these pages, and I know things about certain things, and I want to share that with the world. And when you do that, it's a very powerful thing. Look at what Wikipedia has done versus the old model of like World Book and Britannica and stuff. They have become the world's encyclopedia, and it's entirely free. How many more people are going to be pursuing this kind of work if they have a basic income? If an income is no longer required, if they don't have to figure out a way in order to pay for rent and pay for food, and they would just want to use that basic income and focus on this kind of really meaningful to society unpaid work, they can do that. And right now, only kind of the privileged who actually have such incomes already can do that. That's just, to me, kind of mind-boggling to think of just how much more valuable work could be done with basic income versus, like, there was an article I saw recently with an image that just made me laugh. It was one of these basic income articles where it asked, again, like, what would people do? You know, like, why would they work? And they showed a picture of this guy wearing like a kind of sandwich board, but it's just a human billboard is what it is. And there's no reason that job does not need to exist. And they were basically asking, like, what would this person do otherwise? It's like, well, come on, like, really, do you think like that's the goal of humanity, is to be a walking billboard? Like, there's so much more valuable work out there for people to do, and they're certainly going to do that. That person is not doing that because they love that job.
They're trying to eat the next day.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know, it makes me think about what kind of long-term effects it would have on people growing up in a society like that. You know, like right now, if you ask a kid what they want to be, they have some insane cool idea of what they want to do, you know, like I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a cat trainer, or whatever, and then they grow up to be a tax accountant or something.
I think what's fascinating for me is thinking about the explosion of creativity and innovation and entrepreneurship. Like, I would just be interested to see the art and music that comes out.
Oh, sure.
All of a sudden, my favorite bands who quit because they couldn't make money in music would get back together and like...
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and people can do that and still work. Like, they can say, okay, well, instead of working 40 hours a week, I'm going to work, let's say, 25 hours a week, which, by the way, is ideal for productivity. But they can reduce the amount of work in their job, in which case that would also equivocate to more shared work. If we're worried about technological unemployment, then if there's half as much work, we can employ everybody if people worked half as much. Like, there's no reason why we just don't work less as far as the labor market goes. And so, yeah, people can work a little bit less in the labor market, and at the same time pursue these other things as well. And again, yeah, they could even pursue it full time, but that's all their choice. They could choose to do these things, which they don't have that ability now. Yeah, as far as like long-term effects, I think a really good example is what's been going on in North Carolina. And this is with involving a dividend from casinos for the Cherokee population there. This has been going on for about 20 years now. And it was this really fortunate circumstance where there were researchers there that were studying poverty, like they were studying low-income groups. And a few years later, suddenly the Cherokee started giving out dividends to everybody who were Cherokee. Those people and their kids were already in this group that were being studied. So it created this really interesting natural experiment that just was very serendipitous. You know, the most recent studies are fascinating to see the long-term effects that have happened. So some of this is that there was actually a decrease in alcohol use in these families, and they found that because these families argued less about money, which of course people widely know is that's kind of the thing that we most argue about. So if you take that off the table, or at least reduce it, like these were amounts, they were about an extra $4,000 a year on average. So it's a third of a basic income, as far as I would qualify it in the U.S. So they get this extra money, and they found that the parents essentially became better parents. They were able to focus more on their kids. They were able to spend more time with them. They were less stressed out, and this had an effect on the kids that was pretty profound, I would think, is that these kids ended up having personality differences. They showed more agreeableness with other kids. They showed more of a propensity to work together. They were more, again, these are pro-social effects as a result of this. And there's this hypothesis that personality is more plastic in youth, and then as you become an adult, and it kind of hardens and your personality kind of sets. As a child, if you're more willing to work with other people, if you have these personalities that we actually, I would say, want to create, that sets in. So as adults, they have these more pro-social personalities. And of course, they will have kids, and their kids will have more pro-social personalities, especially if, again, their poverty is eliminated or at least reduced. So this is a very long-term effect and result of basic income.
So how do you see transition happening? That's probably the biggest hurdle we have to get over, is how would this possibly be a discussion in Congress?
Yeah, so I do think that the main barrier at this point, I would say, is just a lack of knowledge of the idea of basic income and its possibility. There's just so many people who don't know about it yet, especially in the U.S., but all over the world, depending on what country you're talking about. But we do need people to know about this idea, and they need to be talking about it. And we've seen that there's actually a correlation between how much you know about it and how much you like the idea. So the more you know about basic income, the more you like it. That's just how it is. Like there's a very few people who learn more about it and decide they like it less. So the important part is educating people and getting it out there and spreading awareness. So that's step one. Immediate step. Now, step two, again, I do think it's going to be more bottom up, but you do need to start somewhere. So you get enough momentum for basic income, and then you start with some kind of smaller foot in the door kind of thing, I think, at least in the U.S., is that I really like the idea of a carbon fee and dividend, or essentially we could do a basic income, and we could start small with this smaller amount. So it would be you add a price to carbon, therefore de-incentivizing its use, and at the same time negating the regressive nature of that by providing the income gained from that to people. And if you do that, the result is actually an increase of incomes for the bottom 2/3 versus the top 1/3, because people with the larger carbon footprints are those with more money. That's just how it works out. That's a policy that I think is kind of a two birds with one stone kind of thing. Like, we need a carbon tax as soon as possible, I think. The most political way of doing that is to do it with a revenue neutral way, which is giving the money back to everybody universally. And so that is basic income. It's just, it would be a smaller amount. So we get that, we do it immediately, and we actually get people used to earning an income outside the labor market that's not attached to work. And people would see, oh, well, this is okay. Like, I'm okay with earning this money, just like everyone in Alaska is okay with earning the Alaska dividend. You get people used to this, and you get people seeing that, oh, look, they're not wasting their money. And oh, look at all this, the new business, and look at how good for the economy this extra amount was. That's a way of starting now and starting small and growing it. Because again, with the carbon fee and dividend, another thing is that you would ramp it up year after year. So the amount would grow year after year. And then let's say if you're at $200 or $300 a month in a carbon dividend, then again, you only have to raise an additional, say, $700 per month to give everybody a basic income of $1,000. So we can start now and save money when we do it. That's one way, I think, of getting a foot in the door. But there are other ways as well that may even work better. Like maybe in the U.S., we could start doing an enlarged, enhanced EITC, which would be essentially transforming the earned income tax credit to more like a negative income tax.
How would that work?
Well, so the way that the EITC is designed right now is that, unfortunately, you have to be earning some form of income, and then you get this boost in that income. And then it goes up to a certain point, and then you start slowly losing that boost until it's gone. And that varies by household size, and it's virtually nothing if you don't have any kids. And so, but if you expand that, if you say, okay, we're going to give it as well to people without kids, and we are going to make it bigger, and we're also going to say that it goes to those who aren't working, who aren't earning any income, that they would get this too, then that is essentially this negative income tax, which is what we talked about in the 70s, which is, again, it's very similar to a basic income. The only difference is that a negative income tax, you pull the money away from the basic income that you're giving, essentially. So as you earn, with those with higher incomes would receive less of the amount, versus a universal basic income, which is everybody receives the same amount, but then the clawback is through the income tax system, so that a billionaire would be paying, say, $400 million in taxes, but they would still be receiving $12,000. So they're paying far more into it, but they're still receiving it. And so I do believe the UBI makes the most sense, and I think that's the aim, our ultimate goal is what we should be doing. But I do think that we could go that route potentially as a foot in the door starting point kind of situation just to work in that direction. EITC is something that is considered very popular in the U.S. for decades. So there's no reason why we couldn't agree to that being a first step, as long, again, as we decouple the earned income component, which I think makes less and less sense in a technological unemployed world. We got to sever that connection between work and income. So people without any income should be able to receive something, and that's really important.
What about platforms like Patreon?
Oh, yeah. Like Patreon, I use it, and I immediately love that concept of this kind of Kickstarter-like platform where people could earn incomes directly from those who love the work that they're doing. People think for some reason that with a basic income, you'll be creating a population where there's, a whole lot of people who are only earning the basic income and that's it. And, they're ignoring all the ways of earning income on top of it. And Patreon is a great example of a way for people to earn this additional income through the work that they're doing. So you'd have your basic income of, say, $1,000 a month, and then you'd be able to, through Patreon, earn an additional $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month even, or $3,000 or whatever. Like this is it's an additional way of earning income. I created the big Patreon Creator Pledge, which is this idea that you crowdfund a basic income like I have, and any surplus that you earn over that, you distribute to those who have promised to do the same. So what I'm trying to do is kind of crowdfund basic incomes for people right now. It's only the beginning of that, and it's theoretically possible. I've done it, and I know other people will do this as well. I would like to see more people get interested in this as well, but I think for the most part, it's harder to do because right now you don't have that income floor. So people want to keep as much of their earnings as they can. It's hard to give away that surplus. It takes, like I've done, a pledge. You have to decide that $1,000 a month is enough, and that you want to make sure that everybody else is $1,000 a month too. It's more difficult. It's possible, but it's more difficult. And I would love to see more people do it.
We've also started doing Patreon a few months ago, and it's been growing every month, which is really awesome to see. But it's not nearly enough yet. But
yeah, that's great. Yeah, it was a year for me to grow from $0 a month to $1,000 a month. It takes time, and it takes a lot of work. Another thing I learned is that it's not only one kind of work. So yeah, I was writing, and you guys are podcasting. But the other part of this is that there's so much like marketing you have to do. You have to do your own marketing. No one's doing it for you. So you have to build your social media presence, and you have to get out there and make sure that everything that you do has as many eyes or ears as possible. And all of that takes time, and it takes time away from doing the stuff that you would prefer to be doing. But again, it's all on you. If you are unable to focus on it fully, like if you're having to do a part-time job or even a full-time job as I would say as your side gig, because your main thing is what you most love. So your main thing is podcasting, and your side gig or whatever. Any work elsewhere slows down your progress on what you're most passionate about.
So true.
It's so true. I recognize that there are so many benefits to basic income, but I wonder if there are any downsides that you see.
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot too. I see this as an eye of the beholder issue. And so, again, I look at the experiments, and there were people that did not like the basic income in Namibia and even India. The people who didn't like it were the moneylenders. They were the people who earn their incomes essentially off people not having income. And so that's one thing. And the people who didn't like it were those who owned like their larger farms, and they were looking for workers, for those farms. People, again, because there was this huge jump in entrepreneurship, people shifted their work from the labor market to being their own employers. Like people just, I feel a lot of people want to do that and they can't. So if you are an employer and you're doing, and the work that you're offering to people is low demand work, it's work that people don't like to do, then yeah, you're going to have to pay more in order to attract that labor. And they're not going to like that. But that's not all employers either. Some employers are going to be able to have to not offer as much money. And like even with startups, like right now, what's preventing so many startups from happening is that you have to find the venture capital in order to fund your group of people, your core group. And suddenly with basic income, people can actually not have to raise that funding because they already have enough to live and they can just devote their work to this creating this new idea. And they don't even have to be paid. They can be paid when it becomes profitable. And that changes the situation. Like you can actually have labor that's less paid and you can have paper that's more paid, even if they're just even poor employers. Like let's say just people don't like them. Let's say the work might not be bad, but let's say they're just not fun to work for. Then they're not going to like basic income, and they're going to see this as a negative because it affects them negatively. But I think if you take the big picture, then I don't see that as a negative. I think they just need to change the way that they behave. I think they need to offer better incentives, and I think they need to be better employers. And I think that's better for everybody. But again, yeah, they won't see it that way. Another thing I want to mention too is that this idea that people will do nothing but say stay at home and watch TV or play video games or whatever. I just want to look at that for a moment because I think that we're wrong about the way that we see that. Bertrand Russell wrote this great essay called In Praise of Idleness. At one point, he mentions this idea of why is it that work, like the products that we do and the services that we do, why is it that the baker is seen as doing something good and all that work is good and the bread is good, but then the people who eat it and the act of eating is bad? It doesn't seem to make any sense. It's like saying that keyholes are good, but keys are bad. It's like they're two sides of the same thing. Like you need that. What is the point of doing everything that we're doing if we can't enjoy it? If you even have someone who does no work in the labor market and they're just consumers, they are paying for that. They are consuming, and they're even they're paying in value added taxes, they're paying in sales taxes, they're paying other taxes. They're still paying into this, and they're buying these products that wouldn't otherwise be purchased. It's amazing to me that we're spending like over $100 million building video games right now. I mean, they're bigger than movies, and they take years. And then why is it that playing them is seen so badly? It doesn't make any sense to me, especially when I look at YouTube as well. If you look at just what people even learn from these things, like no one is just sitting here watching movies 24 hours a day for their entire lives. Like you're doing it for some purpose. You're getting something out of it. Like even I think Quentin Tarantino is a good example of, can you imagine like if you were somebody who's judgmental and you're seeing Quentin Tarantino watch all these movies and you're just looking at him and you're going, gosh, like you're so lazy. You're not doing anything but watching movies. His movie watching informed everything after that. At some point, he started creating movies, and he started creating movies because of everything he watched, and he learned from everything he watched, and that's what he put back in. So he consumed from society, and now he's a massive creator of stuff that people love to consume as well. And so there's this inspirational effect. There's this learning. There's so much that goes on in these video games and movies watching and whatnot that we don't value that I think that we should.
I completely agree.
Thanks so much for joining us today. That was fascinating and so great to hear about all of this.
Yeah, I think we could actually talk a lot more about this. So maybe we'll have you on again sometime in the future.
That would be cool.
That'd be great. Thanks just so much for having me, guys. And thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you to you as well. Take care.
Check out the links to the studies and the other resources that we mentioned in this episode. There are quite a few of them. Go to futurethinkers.org/episode 31. And to help us make more of these episodes, go to futurethinkers.org/support to find out how you can become a supporter.